The phone rang at 2:47 a.m., cutting through the silence of Richard Blackwell's penthouse like a blade. As one of America's wealthiest tech moguls, he was accustomed to late-night calls about market crashes, hostile takeovers, or emergency board meetings. But the trembling voice on the other end wasn't his assistant or a business partner. It was a stranger whose words would shatter his carefully constructed world. "Mr. Blackwell? This is Maria Santos, a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about your daughter. She's lying unconscious on the street outside our emergency room." Richard's blood ran cold. His daughter, Emma, was supposed to be safely tucked away at her elite boarding school in Connecticut, 300 miles from the gritty downtown hospital where this nurse claimed to have found her. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My daughter is at Westfield Academy. Sir, she had your business card in her pocket, along with a note that says, 'Dad.' I'm sorry. Please, you need to come quickly." 20 minutes later, Richard's helicopter touched down on the hospital's rooftop helipad. He'd made the journey in record time, his mind racing with questions and fears he'd never allowed himself to confront. When had he last spoken to Emma? Really spoken to her? Not just the obligatory weekly check-ins about grades and expenses. The realization hit him like a physical blow. It had been months. Maria Santos was waiting for him in the ICU, her scrubs wrinkled from a long shift, dark circles under her kind eyes. She was younger than he'd expected, probably in her late 20s, with calloused hands that spoke of years spent caring for others. Everything about her was the opposite of the polished, calculating people who filled Richard's daily life. "How is she?" Richard's voice cracked despite his efforts to maintain composure. "Stable, but we're still running tests. She's malnourished and dehydrated." "When did you last see your daughter, Mr. Blackwell?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. "Christmas," he admitted, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. She wanted to spend spring break with friends instead of coming home. Maria's expression didn't change, but he caught something in her eyes, not judgment, but a profound sadness that made his chest tighten. "She's been living on the streets for 3 weeks, sir. Some of the other kids we treat told me she's been trying to get clean on her own, refusing to ask for help because she was afraid of disappointing you." The words hit Richard like a sledgehammer. Emma, his brilliant, beautiful daughter who could have had anything money could buy, had been living on the streets rather than face him with her problems. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who could solve billion-dollar crises with a phone call had been completely blind to his own child's desperate situation. "Can I see her?" Maria led him through sterile corridors that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. The ICU was a world Richard had never entered, where beeping machines kept vigil over broken bodies and families prayed for miracles they couldn't afford to buy. Emma lay pale and fragile in the hospital bed, looking younger than her 17 years, her once lustrous hair now dull and matted. Richard sank into the chair beside her bed, finally allowing the facade of control to crumble. "I failed her," he whispered, not caring that Maria could hear his confession. "I gave her everything except what she actually needed." "It's not too late," Maria said quietly, checking Emma's IV with practiced efficiency. "But it's going to take more than money to fix this." Over the next several days, as Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, Richard found himself spending more time talking to Maria than he had to anyone in years. She worked double shifts to pay for her younger brother's medical school, sent money to her parents in El Salvador, and still found time to volunteer at a homeless shelter on weekends. Her life was a masterclass in sacrifice and service that made Richard's achievements seem hollow by comparison. "Why did you become a nurse?" he asked one evening as she adjusted Emma's blankets with the gentle care of someone who truly understood the value of human dignity. Maria paused, considering her answer. "My grandmother always said that we're not measured by what we accumulate, but by what we give away. Money runs out, Mr. Blackwell, but kindness multiplies." It was then that Richard noticed the small details he'd been blind to before. How Maria stayed late to read to elderly patients who had no visitors, how she slipped granola bars to homeless people who came to the ER seeking warmth, how she remembered the names of every patient's children and asked about them during follow-up visits. When Emma finally woke up on the 4th day, her first words weren't to her father but to Maria. "The nurse with the kind eyes," she whispered. "You stayed with me." Of course, Mija, Maria replied, squeezing Emma's hand. You're never alone here. Richard watched the exchange with a mixture of gratitude and shame. This woman, who earned in a year what he spent on a weekend in the Hamptons, had given his daughter something priceless, genuine human connection and unconditional care. As Emma began her recovery, Richard made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of whisking her away to an exclusive private facility, he asked Maria if she would consider becoming Emma's private nurse during her rehabilitation. But Maria's response changed everything. Mr. Blackwell, your daughter doesn't need a private nurse. She needs her father. And there are dozens of kids in this city who need what you can provide. Not just money, but hope. That conversation led to the creation of the Emma Blackwell Recovery Center, a comprehensive facility that combined medical treatment, psychological counseling, and job training for young people struggling with addiction and homelessness. Richard insisted that Maria lead the program, offering her a salary that would secure her family's future. But Maria negotiated something different, a partnership where the center would be run by people who understood struggle, not just success. She became the director, but only if Richard committed to spending at least 20 hours a week working directly with the kids, learning their stories, and rebuilding the empathy that years of corporate isolation had eroded. 6 months later, Richard stood in the center's common room, watching Emma facilitate a support group for teenagers who'd aged out of foster care. She was healthy again, her eyes bright with purpose, her voice strong as she shared her story without shame. Maria was there too, training a new volunteer, Richard's former assistant, who'd been so moved by the transformation she'd witnessed that she'd left her six-figure job to work at the center. The phone in Richard's pocket buzzed with urgent messages about stock, prices, and merger negotiations. But he didn't reach for it. Instead, he listened as a 16-year-old boy named Marcus talked about his dreams of becoming a teacher, despite growing up in 7 different foster homes. That night, as Richard walked Maria to her car, he realized that the woman who'd saved his daughter had ultimately saved him too. She'd shown him that true wealth wasn't measured in market capitalization or private jets, but in the number of lives you touched and the legacy of kindness you left behind. Thank you, he said simply. Maria smiled, the same gentle expression that had comforted Emma during her darkest hours. Your daughter saved herself. Mr. Blackwell, she just needed someone to believe she was worth saving. As her car disappeared into the night, Richard understood that sometimes the most profound phone calls come from strangers who see what we're blind to, that beneath all our achievements and failures, we're all just human beings desperately in need of connection, compassion, and the chance to be better than we were yesterday. The Emma Blackwell Recovery Center now serves hundreds of young people every year, but its real success isn't measured in statistics. It's found in the moments when a billionaire sits on the floor listening to a homeless teenager's story, when a former addict becomes a counselor, and when a nurse's simple act of calling a stranger in the middle of the night ripples outward into countless acts of healing and hope. Because sometimes salvation comes not from those who have everything, but from those who give everything they have.